As a lot of you know, I moved to Utah a couple of years ago, and it's a super dry state. I do a lot of mountain biking, hiking, and skiing, and when I do those activities in this dry of a climate, it's crucial to avoid getting dehydrated, and that's where LMNT comes in. What a lot of people don't realize is that healthy hydration isn't just about drinking water, it's about replacing water and electrolytes, which makes sense because you lose both water and sodium when you sweat. So both need to be replaced to prevent muscle cramps, headaches, and energy dips. Unfortunately, the typical solutions on the market, Gatorade, other sports drinks, and low-quality electrolyte packs, are often loaded with sugar and a lot of artificial colors and flavors. This is why I've become a huge fan of LMNT. LMNT is a zero-sugar electrolyte solution for people who want to stay hydrated but don't want to put a lot of junk in their bodies. It comes in super convenient individual packs that you just mix into your water bottle and you're good to go. No sugar or artificial junk, just electrolytes and great taste. LMNT was formulated by my good friend and former research biochemist Rob Wolf to provide the optimal ratios of sodium, potassium, and magnesium for health, performance, and energy. They also did a great job with the flavors. My favorites are orange salt and watermelon salt, but they have several other great flavors that are worth trying too. I've turned most of my friends and family onto LMNT and they love it, so I wanted to give you the chance to try it too. For a limited time, the folks at LMNT are offering a free LMNT sample pack, which comes with 8 packets of LMNT, one of each flavor they sell. All you have to do is cover the cost of shipping, which is $5 for US customers and location dependent for international customers. LMNT has been an absolute game changer for me and so many people I know. I put one in my water bottle virtually every day and never exercise or do anything active without it. I hope you get as much benefit from it as I do. Just go to drinkelement.com/Kresser. That's DRINKLMNT.com/Kresser to claim your free LMNT sample pack. You only cover the cost of shipping. Again, that's drinkelement.com/Kresser. DRINKLMNT.com/Kresser. Hey everybody, Chris Kresser here. Welcome to another episode of Revolution Health Radio. This week, I'm excited to welcome my friend and colleague Autumn Smith as a guest. Autumn has a pretty similar story to mine in terms of her recovery from a complex and debilitating chronic illness earlier in her life. She suffered from severe IBS and also severe anxiety and mental health issues. So I think you'll get a lot out of this podcast. We talk about the link between diet and mental health, why nutrient deficiency is widespread even in the industrialized world and wealthy countries, and what you can do about it, the importance of gut health, not only for mental and behavioral health, but in general, the decline in soil quality and what that has meant in terms of nutrient density of foods we eat, even on a good diet, sustainable agriculture and regenerative farming and more. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I think you will as well. Let's dive in. Autumn, it's such a pleasure to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. It's really an honor to be here, and I'm just excited to connect.
How's 2022 been for you so far?
We live in Boulder. It's been the weirdest ever.
Wildfires in January or December. It's strange, huh?
It was weird because we could literally see the fires from my son's bedroom, and we didn't know if we were kind of right on the perimeter, and we didn't know if we were going to be evacuated that night. And literally, that we had been complaining because we couldn't get snow. We love our white Christmases, and the next day, of course, we finally got snowfall. It's just devastating. But other than that, 2022 has been pretty good. How about for you?
Yeah, good. I've been enjoying the winter so far. It's we got a lot of snow over Christmas here in Utah, like 6 or 7 feet in 10 days. I think it was a pretty white Christmas, and that made me happy. So it was fun.
Awesome.
Looking forward to talking to you about the link between diet and mental health. I know it's just something that you pay a lot of attention to, and nutrient status and why that's important, which is something I pay a lot of attention to as well. and then, just chat a little bit about what you've learned through your experience as a nutritionist. And, you've also, like me, had a pretty intense experience with chronic symptoms over your life that, eventually led you down the path that you're on now, and eventually to also create a company around that to help people who are dealing with similar issues. So really looking forward to this. Why don't you start by telling folks who aren't familiar with your work a little bit about your story, how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, well, it's a long one, but I'm going to keep it relatively brief. When I was about 10 years old, I started to have digestive issues. It was just bloating and sometimes a lot of cramping, and we didn't really know what to do. I lived in a small town in Montana, and my parents tried, but they said I had irritable bowel syndrome, and
Right.
they gave me Beano, and they said, this is stress related, so relax. And I was like, oh, okay. So that didn't do anything. And as I got older, those symptoms that started in my gut, now I know there's a big gut brain connection. And so I started to have mental health issues, anxiety, depression. They put me on antidepressants and all the meds, and that made it worse. And pretty soon I just came to realize, okay, I'm broken. I'm going to need to use substances. My life is unmanageable, unpredictable. And I did that. And I just smoked and drank and did all the things until I met my husband, Chaz, who, even though I was living a life, I was a celebrity fitness trainer. I was making things happen. I danced professionally. When he saw who I was when I wasn't putting on this persona, he realized I was really suffering. And so he decided to have us try and fix this together. And so we tried the paleo diet, which seemed silly to me at the time, back in 2008, 7. And it worked so well that I shared it with 200 of my friends right away. And when they noticed differences and changes, I thought, you know what? I have a great job as a celebrity fitness trainer. I'm going to have to quit, go back to school, and kind of help people understand this wellness piece, because I'd always been fit, but I wasn't always well. And so we founded our companies because I thought, as someone who doesn't love to linger in the kitchen, and, one time I was on a world tour, I was like, people need tools as much as they needed education. And I know people like you and Rob Wolf, you were out there educating very well. So we went into the product space so that everybody could live this kind of whole food lifestyle in our busy modern world.
Well, thanks for sharing that. It's I would say, 90% of people in our field have a story of their own, somewhat similar to yours and to mine, that brought them into this field. And I think that makes a big difference, because when you have a connection, personal connection to, what it's like to suffer, that empathy can really shows up in all the different ways that you can serve people, whether that's working as a nutritionist, or and helping people make better choices, or creating products that help people to make better choices and help people be well in a pretty challenging world. It makes a big difference. So let's talk a little bit more about diet and mental health, because somebody has to. it's it's not being talked about in the mainstream world, right? Still, after all this time, I'm horrified by how little attention this link gets. I'll sometimes have people who are in my sphere, let's say they're not close in, but acquaintances, people that I know through various different things in my life, and they know a little bit about what I do. So they come to me and they say, my son, my daughter, me, whatever, is experiencing a lot of, it could be anxiety, could be depression, could be behavioral health issues, ADHD, whatever. And I start asking them questions about what they've done, who they've talked to, et cetera. And I would say less than 1 out of 10 times does the concept, even like an idea that food could have anything to do with the symptoms, even enters their consciousness. And I don't blame them as individuals. It's a shortcoming of our whole approach. But what's the problem with that? I mean, why, like, how can we be in that place still at this point in time?
I honestly have no idea, but that is exactly where I started in 2010. I didn't even believe, or 2007, that changing my diet would improve my digestive symptoms, because, for some reason that was a novel concept to me. So yeah, I find it really, really sad. And I got really interested in this topic because it was an unanticipated side effect of me changing my diet for digestive issues. And then all of a sudden I was like, whoa, I'm stable, I'm peaceful, I'm centered, I have energy. And so I've been working with people for a few years on this. And luckily, the research is coming out with Dr. Felice Jacka showing, that a Mediterranean diet can actually be very useful, even for people who are majorly depressed. But we also know that these effects are in children when their mom eats a processed foods diet, that they're going to be at higher risk for anxiety. And then we also know it literally can change the size of your brain in certain regions. So the research is pretty clear, even though it's just kind of starting to accumulate. And when I work with people, there are 3 general things I like people to know. And we can flesh it out later. But the first is that depression and other mental illnesses are often rooted in inflammation. So, and I'd read the book, The Inflamed Brain, Edward Bullmore, and there are so many ways to reduce inflammation, and your diet, because 70 to 80% of your immune system resides in the gut, is a really powerful place to begin. And then the second thing is that imbalanced blood sugar often masquerades as mental health issues. And I think we all have that experience when we, eat a high carb meal or refined carbs, and then eventually we come down and we crash and we're irritable or we're hangry, we're restless. And these are symptoms of a blood sugar issue. But what I used to do was attribute it to whatever was happening at that time. Oh, well, Chaz is so annoying, my husband, or, oh my gosh, my life it's unmanageable. Something I'm doing. So it can be often as simple as balancing your blood sugar. And the last one is just the nutrient deficiency. It can be that simple too. B12 deficiency is huge. If you don't have enough B12, your brain's not going to work well. Neurotransmitter production can be thwarted. And so going through those 3 steps I found is really powerful, and it takes some time. We can talk about how we measured and all of that, but those 3 steps have been so powerful for the people that I work with in changing their mental health dramatically, even though sometimes they kick and scream when you do it. But there's really simple ways to start too, like just eliminating processed foods and soda. And for some people, caffeine. It was, for me, caffeine was a big player in my, and also upgrading the fats of your diet. There's research to suggest trans fats and omega-6 fatty acids in general might be detrimental, but lots of places to start. But there is a clear link, because we know the gut actually has a second brain. It's connected straight to our brain by the vagus nerve. The neurotransmitters we find in our brain are also in our gut. And sometimes just these changes, like irritable bowel syndrome, constipation, they can send messages to the brain that can change shifts in our mood. So whereas we used to think it's only the brain that tells our gut that, oh, where I'm nervous, so I have butterflies. We now know if you have dysbiosis and other things going on in your gut, it can just send a message straight to your brain that can create these mood changes.
Bidirectional connection. And in functional medicine, we say fire in the gut, fire in the brain, which is, now has been, there are several popular books out there about this, which are great. And I'm glad to see that it's getting more attention, but it's still a kind of small niche that it's getting that attention in. And it's a shame to me, because the incidence of mental and behavioral health disorders is just off the charts in the US, whether you're talking about kids or adults. And that's only increased with COVID, during the COVID pandemic, for lots of understandable reasons. And, I think even just drawing that connection between inflammation and depression and anxiety is really important. So I kind of want to highlight that. I've been writing about this for almost since I started, because I came across the paper, which I'm sure you've seen or seen reports on, Autumn, that defined this early on. It's called the inflammatory cytokine model of depression, which is basically the understanding that you have dysbiosis in the gut, or an undetected gut infection, SIBO, something like that, that causes inflammation in the gut. Those inflammatory cytokines leave the gut, because the gut's permeable when there's inflammation, enter the bloodstream, travel across the blood-brain barrier, and then suppress the activity of the frontal cortex, which produces symptoms which are indistinguishable from what we call depression. And no one really know. I mean, I think there's more than one cause of depression, but I think a lot of the research at this point suggests that this inflammatory cause or model is present in the majority of people who have depression. And yet, again, very few people, if they're depressed, will think, oh, I guess I'm dealing with inflammation, right? That's not a connection that people tend to make. And it's not to diminish the importance of situational factors and good therapy and all of that, but I want that to be part of what somebody thinks of if they're experiencing depression.
Yeah, and they've done research to show that, you can make someone feel depressed by using certain medications that bring
Sure.
inflammation on, and then you
Like
can.
antiviral drugs and yeah.
Yes. And then in kids, the rates of depression, or I'm sorry, inflammatory markers in the blood are predictive of depression later in life. And that maybe depression in people who are treatment resistant more often is a result of inflammation.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and when you look at some of the lifestyle interventions that are extremely effective with depression, exercise probably being the one that is most. I mean, if you look at research,
Yeah.
exercise is as effective as antidepressants or more for moderate, mild to moderate depression. What is one of the things that exercise does? It keeps inflammation in check, presuming you're not going overboard, and, as some people
Yeah.
in our world tend to do. But yeah, it puts the brakes on inflammation. So, and of course, diet, which we're going to talk more about, like eating a nutrient dense, whole foods, anti-inflammatory diet, that's going to put the brakes on inflammation as well. So it has multiple impacts, right? It's reducing inflammation, but then it's making sure you're getting enough nutrients, which you mentioned as well. And then it also addressing the third factor, which is directly feeding your beneficial bacteria and cultivating good gut health. So there's all these virtuous cycles.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, it absolutely changed my life when I changed my diet, and it seems way too simple. And there's also some really interesting, like supplemental compounds. I just want people to know about, turmeric has been shown to be as potent, as antidepressant drugs like Prozac. Even 1,000 milligrams of EPA was found to work as well in at least one trial. There's carnitine. It's just like we always jump to
Probiotics. Yeah.
probiotics.
Hmm.
Exactly. We always jump to, oh, there's a chemical imbalance and I need medication, and we've been taught that. But there's so many other things you can try. And like you said, diet's a big place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. It's notable. I mean, I don't think it's useful to spend too much time on why this isn't known further. I think we can all probably guess some reasons why. Um, Not a lot of money
Yeah, it's
in
too easy.
this. Yeah, well, and nobody's making a lot of money off telling people to eat well and take care of their gut health and get enough nutrients. So, but that's like nutrient. Let's come back to nutrient deficiency, because a lot of times when I talk about nutrient deficiency, people think, okay, well, that might be a problem in like sub-Saharan Africa or India or parts of China where there's like significant poverty and people don't have enough to eat. And they're right. Of course, it is a problem in those places. But what about in the US and the UK and Scandinavia and these developed countries? Is nutrient deficiency a problem in those places as well?
Yes, absolutely. We're actually dealing with something called hidden hunger, where we have this surplus of calories that aren't necessarily nutrient dense, but that we're also not getting a lot of the nutrients that we need because we've prioritized certain methods of production. And it's estimated that we need 2 times the amount of meat, 3 times the amount of fruits, and 4 to 5 times the amount of vegetables that we would have needed in 1940 to get the same amount of nutrients. And even according to the USDA, they acknowledge that over 90% of us are deficient in at least one nutrient, right? And you can be overweight and still nutrient deficient. And when you are, you're going to have a harder time burning fat. You're going to feel lethargic. Your body's just not going to work as well. And so, yeah, most of us, pretty much everyone, I think we can safely assume, is deficient in certain nutrients. And there's even nutrients of real particular importance when it comes to mental health issues, and we can get into that. But I have yet to work with someone when I dialed in their diet who has checked off all the nutrient boxes. It just I just don't see that happen ever.
Yeah. There are a lot of issues here, a lot of challenges, and it's a vicious cycle, I think, where you have inadequate intake of nutrients, and that can just be because of poor choices. Off the top, we know 60% of Americans, or 60% of the calories Americans get, are not just from processed foods, but from ultra processed foods. So there's that. But then you mentioned another factor, like even if someone's making pretty good choices, there's this degradation in soil quality. And of course, all the nutrients come from soil. So if there's a decline, and I want to come back to this, so I'm just going to touch on it here, but I want to dive deeper into that. So even if you're making good choices, you're not getting the same level of nutrition that your ancestors were, whether you're talking about our ancestors 100 years ago, or 5,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago. But then you have poor gut health. Yep. So people, if they have, issues with the gut, they're not digesting and absorbing the nutrients, even if they're eating the right stuff. And then you've got the fact that any chronic disease, whether it's diabetes or obesity or heart condition or autoimmune condition, increases the demand for nutrients. So you need more than you would need if you didn't have that condition. So yeah, it seems like when you put all that together, we're swimming upstream. We're starting from kind of below zero, and we have to really pay a lot of attention to get back to where we need to be.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of the people that I work with who are already paleo, they're often deficient in things like B vitamins a lot of times, and sometimes calcium, and even omega-3 fatty acids. I don't know why I find that people are resistant to eating as much fish as I'd like them to.
Yeah, they're not eating often fish, or if they're not eating pasture-raised animal products, then there's not really that much of a source of EPA and DHA.
Right. And you've probably written about this, but Columbia University did kind of some analyses to determine which nutrients are the most important for mental health, and things like iron and zinc and the B vitamins and magnesium and omega-3 fatty acids. And they even looked at what are the most antidepressant protective foods, and it's oysters and poultry giblets and fish and cruciferous vegetables and colorful fruits and veggies. So those foods need to become staples if we are going to reverse the trend of nutrient deficiency.
Yeah, for sure. And it's these are foods that were also much more common in our ancestors' diet. Again, it could be as recently as our grandparents. I know that my grandma took cod liver oil, and my mom talks about being given cod liver oil when she was sick growing up, and she didn't like that. But that was still happening here in the US a lot. And people, my dad still actually grew up occasionally eating liver, he would liver and onions. But now today, these foods are not really part of our diet. And you know this, Autumn. This, hopefully a lot of my longer term listeners know this, but those are the foods that are the most nutrient dense. You mentioned oysters, off the charts with zinc and copper and iron and other nutrients. So talk a little bit about the most nutrient dense foods, the foods that you recommend people integrate into their diet, not as medicine per se, but with the awareness that we're all kind of struggling and we have to pay some attention to this. And it's not sometimes enough even just to eat a quote healthy diet, whether that's paleo, Mediterranean, whatever choice you're making, that you actually have to take a step beyond that sometimes to make sure you're getting enough nutrients. So what are the foods that you recommend? And if you have any tips or tricks for how to, because I'm sure we both struggle with this, my patients, getting them to actually eat liver or eat shellfish, or how do you work with people in that way?
Absolutely. And like you said, I started the paleo diet, then I learned how to balance my blood sugar in addition to the paleo diet. And then I learned how to increase my nutrient density. And it was only when I kind of got all three figured out that I felt my best. But the foods that I think number one is fermented foods, because it's been shown people who have social anxiety, when they eat fermented foods, I think this trial was done in yogurt, they feel better. And so they're feeding those good gut bugs, right? A lot of us have dysbiosis, as we learned, can create inflammation. So I just do like a fermented day, and I often get raw sauerkraut in my local store, and I just take a spoonful every day, and then I move on with my life. When you get good at that, if you're kind of opposed to eating fermented foods, you can incorporate them a few times a day. But typically I start there, then I do beet kvass, sometimes I do coconut yogurt, sometimes I go all the way with yogurt, sometimes I do our beef sticks, they're fermented too. The second thing is meat in general. There's this big push away from it. You're part of this conversation. You are this conversation. But when women, I notice in particular, don't get enough protein, and I often just have people aim for like 100 grams a day, they suffer emotionally. Their blood sugar's all over the place. Amino acids are the basis of our neurotransmitters. And so just getting people to use them as snacks, like instead of going for some chips, just have, a deviled egg, have some smoked salmon, have one of our beef sticks or something, and just eating, I think at least 30 grams of protein per meal is the goal. And you just need to kind of get a delicious, high quality source of meat. And it doesn't take that many, just few little spices, maybe some grass-fed butter. I also fish out of the can. I eat it all the time, right? Sardines, some oysters. And that is not something I wanted to do naturally. It's something that I had to train myself to do over time. But you sprinkle that with a little mustard. You can get a little mustard, you can get a little sriracha, you can get a little buffalo sauce. And so it's much easier. But fish and meat, there's actually been research to suggest specifically red meat is really protective against depression and anxiety, which I was opposed to eating as well, which is why we started with grass-fed beef sticks. And then I think organ meats, literally like the most nutrient dense. And even that Columbia analysis said we need organ meats in our diet to protect our mental health. They've got so much B12, vitamin A, like you said, iron, copper. It's funny because some researchers in the 1940s, I believe, actually showed that beef liver could cure pernicious anemia. I'm sure you're familiar with this, but which is interesting because iron issues are also often a result of, or for mental health issues can often involve iron dysregulation. And so for organ meats, I did everything I could. I soaked them in milk. I had Chaz not tell me he was going to make me a burger, but just slip a little tripe in there. No, it didn't. It didn't work. And then I used your trick, I think I learned, where you freeze it and then you roll it into balls and then you put it in the back. But I was also pregnant at the time. So even that was not working. So we put it into capsules, and that's what we do. We just heart, liver, and kidney. We made it an organ complex. So that's a great way to do that for people who just aren't there yet. And then just, I always say, aim for 5 servings of fruits and vegetables. As we saw, again, fruits, veggies, color, that is one of the most health protective all around, but also mental health protective things that you can do.
Yeah. I always tell my patients, if you're willing to eat organs and you're actually going to do it, like not just in your imagination, but actually you are going to do it on a regular basis and eat, 1 to 2 servings of liver, for example. Heart, tongue is, I sometimes call the gateway organ meat because even though people tend to be grossed out by tongue, it actually tastes more like a muscle meat, and the nutrient quality is kind of more like a muscle meat too. So it's not as beneficial as liver or heart or kidney. Heart also, a lot of people kind of, as they're getting used to the taste and texture of organ meats, the heart will be the second one that they're able to tolerate. And then liver will generally come after that. Kidney is often a pretty distant fourth, if that ever happens. But I love that you put those together in one product. I'll often recommend it to patients, and we take it ourselves for, just when we don't have time and aren't including those foods in our diet. Because, again, it's like there's the ideal and there's the actual. So if you are a person who just knows you're not going to cook and prepare organ meats, then taking a supplement that is essentially organ meat that's been freeze dried and powdered, I think that's important for people to understand. It's a whole food supplement. You're basically taking it's like eating those organs, but in powdered form. And that you're good at taking capsules and you're willing to do that on a daily basis, I would far rather see somebody do that than not do it at all. And you're going to get a ton of benefit that way.
Yeah, and I even can slip them to my little guy, and I
Right.
just I know you can train the taste buds for sure, but yeah, they've been game changers for me because literally when I take or eat liver, even when I did make myself eat liver, I feel an energy and a vitality that I just
Yeah.
didn't experience otherwise.
It really is a superfood in that
Yeah.
regard, like, especially for energy. Like if I have patients who are really, really low on energy, just getting them to eat liver and, sometimes, some other organ meats as well, or organ capsules like the Organ Delight you guys do, that can make an almost overnight difference in energy levels. People are pretty blown away by it often. Now more than ever, we need our immune systems to be firing on all cylinders. And as you probably know, vitamin C is one of the most important nutrients for proper immune function. Sadly, most people don't get enough vitamin C in their diet. And while some do take multivitamins with C or individual vitamin C supplements, those aren't always a great choice either. Many vitamin C supplements contain synthetic forms of vitamin C. GMOs. Most vitamin C in pills is made from GMO corn syrup. Sugar, toxic fillers and flow agents, which can cause inflammation and gut issues, and allergens like soy, corn, or food coloring. This is why I recommend whole food forms of vitamin C, which contain the full spectrum of vitamin C activity without GMOs or other junk. And my favorite whole food vitamin C product is Essential C from Paleovalley. I love that Paleovalley is dedicated to using the highest quality ingredients. All of their products are ethically sourced, grain-free, soy-free, dairy-free, non-GMO, and contain nothing synthetic. And their Essential C complex is no different. It's made with 3 of the most potent vitamin C-rich superfoods on the planet, one of which is 120 times more potent than an orange. Nothing synthetic, no weird questionable ingredients, just whole food. So you can be confident you're feeding your immune system what it needs to stay strong through whatever 2022 holds. And right now they're offering my community an exclusive 15% off discount. I've been working with the team at Paleovalley for a long time, and I can tell you this is the biggest discount they ever offer, and it's only available for a limited time. Just go to paleovalley.com/Chris and use the code Kresser15 to get 15% off. So let's come back to soil quality and the converse of that. Like we're talking kind of generally about ways to increase nutrient density in your
Mhm.
diet. So first, talk a little bit more about the problems with soil now and why nutrient value has declined, and then maybe a little bit about what somebody might be able to do about that, especially if even just having a window garden or willing to do a little bit of their own work there.
Yes. So the reason a lot of people believe that we have nutrient levels that are declining was the dilution effect, that we were asking too much of our land because we're prioritizing yield and trying to grow too much in too little space. But Dr. Christine Jones, she's a soil scientist. She actually teaches us that it's actually the breakdown of the soil biology. And this happens because of the way that we've been treating and doing agriculture for the last, especially the last 70 years, in that we're using these synthetic inputs and nitrogen fertilizers and pesticides, and we're tilling, and all of those bacteria that have a relationship with the root systems, they stop working, they stop existing. So what we need to do is kind of prioritize forms of agriculture that look at that root system, because what happens in a healthy system is the sun and light and water come and they feed the plant turns the carbon into carbohydrates that go down through the root system, they feed the bacteria, and that's kind of like the bacteria want to return the favor basically for the food, and so they make the nutrients in the soil available. But that doesn't happen. Even if the soil has the nutrients, that biology and the breakdown of it mean that it won't be able to access it. So I think that is the bigger issue, and the one that we really have decided to tackle in our company, and hopefully we'll see more regenerative agriculture soon. But if you're someone who wants to improve your nutrient density of your food, you can grow your own food. You can have a garden. You can also go and support your local farmers. You can ask your farmers about their principles and what they're using, because often, even if you go to stores, it's going to travel thousands of miles and you don't know the conditions, and organic isn't necessarily the same as regenerative. And so just getting involved in your local community, asking the questions that might make people want to move in that direction, creating a demand for it. And yeah, if you have the energy and you want to garden, that's a beautiful place to begin too. I haven't quite made it into that terrain, but I know a lot of my friends who who have herbs and they make their garden fresh salads, and I'm extra jealous. And that is next level, or that's one of my next goals in the next coming few years.
We had a huge garden in California. But it turns out the growing season in the mountains of Utah is quite short.
Yeah.
So, and tomatoes don't love it when it snows in June or in like September, when it was 85 degrees the day before and then it snows 2 days later. So that's mountain living. It's a little bit harder to do here, but it's really worthwhile. Even just having a planter box with kitchen herbs, like basil or cilantro or parsley or something like that. Herbs are one of the most nutrient dense foods, ounce for ounce. So just incorporating more fresh herbs into your diet is something almost anybody can do. And even if you live in New York City or Chicago, you have a little, if you have a window, you can put a little box out there. But farmers markets too. Autumn, you said something that I want to come back to. I've written about this quite a bit. I had Joe Robinson, who is the author of Eat Wild, on my show several years ago. And that book was amazing because it really opened my eyes to the difference in nutrient value just from the where you get your food and basically how long it's been out of the ground is one of the biggest factors, right? So if you, like you just said, if you buy a carrot in Whole Foods, even in Whole Foods, and it's organic, chances are that carrot was on a truck for probably at least 3 or 4 days. Before that, it probably sat in a warehouse for some period of time. And the warehouse is dark, and so is the truck, or they're not exposed to sunlight. So you have, and when those vegetables, once they're out of the ground, especially if they're stored in the dark, they're losing that nutrient value right from the moment they're pulled out of the ground. Versus going down to the farmer's market and buying a carrot that the farmer harvested maybe a day ago, before coming to the farmer's market. Can you talk a little bit about the difference that those kinds of choices make?
Absolutely. Like you said, and a lot of times what they do, if they know that it's going to be traveling, they pick it before it's even ripe. Again, meaning that we won't have as many nutrients to begin with. But also I had that experience. Lance Roll, he's a friend of, maybe you know him. He's the flavor chef. And he recently moved to Boulder. And so I let him make some of my meals. And the first time I tasted his salad, I couldn't believe how much more flavorful it was. I was sure that he was sweetening it with something, but it wasn't. It was just the fact that it was grown locally and it was only a few days old. And the really cool thing about having local food and food that is not traveling thousands of miles is not only the nutrients that we know about, but all these secondary compounds and food that is grown regeneratively. Dr. Fred Provenza does a lot of this work, looking at secondary compounds like carotenoids and terpenoids and phenolics and nutrients that we don't focus on pretty much at all here, but that add that flavor. And they actually add this like satiety provoking mechanism, meaning that we know when it's time to stop. And that is something I've noticed. I know I'm getting more nutrients because it's really locally sourced and it's not degrading over time, but I also don't need as much of it. And so I think there are many benefits to finding a local source of regeneratively raised produce or animal products. This exists in animal products too. And not only are you going to have more nutrients, but you're probably going to need to eat far less than you would otherwise.
Yeah. And it's like you said, in addition to all that, the benefit to your body, the taste is just so different. Like, if you have not had a tomato from a farmer's market, you have not really had a tomato. Like the tomatoes in stores are so different. It really should be almost like a different classification, a different name for it, a different species, because they're so different. Same is true with certain fruits.
Yeah,
Strawberries, the strawberries we would get at the farmers market in the Bay Area at Berkeley when we lived there were just
it's incredible.
crazy. It was like explosion of flavors in the mouth. You can really taste the difference. And those are nutrients that you're tasting. And, all of those compounds that you mentioned, which are aromatic or, have different flavor profiles associated with them. So if you eat something in the store and it tastes kind of bland and, there's not much of a flavor, then sometimes chances are that that might have been on a truck for too long.
Right. And you cut into those tomatoes and they're kind of hard and they're definitely
Right.
not ripe. But yeah,
Yeah.
the experience in your body physiologically, just the pleasure you receive around food is totally different.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk a little bit about, you and Chaz started Paleo Valley, and the intention was to be able to provide some of this whole food nutrition in a way that was more accessible. The organ delight being an example for people who are just not going to cook organ meats, or even if people who do, maybe they're traveling for a couple of weeks or they get particularly busy and they don't have time to do that. It's nice to have that as an option. One of the challenges with this kind of approach is to be able to source really high quality ingredients. So how have you gone about that, and what have you learned in that process?
Yeah, well, this became really important to us. I just want to say we were really lucky that we came across your work early in the game. So we knew the importance of grass-fed and finished. We also knew the importance of synergy, which is you don't find like synthetic isolated compounds in any of our products, but we really became passionate about ingredient quality when our son was born and we learned about regenerative agriculture and how it was different and how we desperately needed this solution. And so from that point on, we just knew we were only going to source from American regenerative farms, because a lot of the regeneratively raised or grass-fed beef is actually imported. And when you're looking at, environmental solutions, and we didn't think that was adequate. And we also wanted to give American farmers an incentive to grow food here, because our soil is like the microbiome of our health, for the planet. So we wanted to restore that. And also when it comes to organic ingredients, we're sticklers, we're perfectionists, and they call us the ingredient snobs. And I have a love-hate relationship with the term, because we also work really hard to make our products accessible for everyone. So I don't think snobbery is the right term, but we
Hmm.
really don't. We want these products to be of value on a daily basis, not something that you can just use here and there. And so, yeah, you're not going to find sugar or GMOs or gluten or dairy or anything refined. You're not going to find unnecessary additives. Even in a lot of beef sticks, they use this ingredient called encapsulated citric acid, which is just the industry standard. And you just label it as citric acid. So even when we first got into the business, they were like, oh, don't worry. You don't even have to label it. No big deal. And I was like, well, it contains, it's derived from genetically modified corn and hydrogenated oils. And I'm not really comfortable with that. So I don't know. Our commitment to quality has been because these kinds of foods products have actually like helped me reclaim my health, and I know will help my son stay healthy. And I think going through it personally has just made sure that we will never cut corners and that we always prioritize health over profit. But there's a lot of different, every product we have is because we found out, oh, this is a synthetic ingredient, we can do it better. Or, oh, even mushroom products, most of them are grown on grain, and then the grain is never separated from the actual mushroom. And so you're getting mushroom supplements with 50% grain, or, most bone broth protein powders actually derive from the hides. And we just wanted one from the bones, and we don't use chemical solvents. And, so there's all throughout every single product we have, the quality of the ingredients in terms of human health and environmental health are always at the forefront.
Yeah, that's super refreshing. It's one of the reasons I often, refer people to your products. Is there are a lot of people a lot of companies out there who are just riding the train, like they realize paleo is, got popular, and so they enter the space. They don't really understand the values and, what's important to people who are really actually in the in the space, or really following that kind of diet and lifestyle. And they talk a good game. They know enough, like their marketing department knows the right words to say. And if you kind of just like a cursory analysis or glance at their products, it might seem like they're doing the right things. But then when you really look under the hood, you can
Mm.
see that, like you said, there's all kinds of choices that 95% of consumers won't even know about.
Yep.
But people like me, people like you, people who do know are paying attention and notice. And I just cringe a lot when I see some of the products out there that call themselves paleo or have that, not that that's necessarily an important thing, but that are clearly marketing themselves as like a very high standard, nutrient dense whole food kind of supplement company. And then when I actually look at what they're doing, it's nothing of the sort. So it's, that's kind of a pet peeve of mine, being in the profession that I'm in. And it's there are some great companies out there that actually are doing the right thing, and it's more expensive and it's harder.
Oh,
So I just appreciate that you guys are willing to fight that fight, because it's definitely important.
yeah. And a lot of these products are made by marketers, like you said, because they come
Yeah.
in, they see an opportunity and they're like, whoa, we have no knowledge, but here we're just going to put this together. And like you said, it's really hard. It's really hard because we're often faced with, oh, well, we can't source that really high quality ingredient. And so we'll have to go out of stock, and it makes people angry, but we'd rather do that than compromise the quality. And like you said, there's this big trend too, which I think is both good and bad, where people are larger companies are acquiring smaller companies and then changing the quality of the ingredients, but nobody really knows that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, unless you have companies who are for their own reasons, or they're educated in this space, it's really easy to cut corners and make choices that are not in the best interest of the people who are actually using the products.
Absolutely. Let's talk about another nutrient that a lot of people don't get enough of, and that's particularly important. The time of this recording is January 2022, so Omicron. People might be listening to this in 2 or 3 years. Who knows what's going to be going on then? But right now, Omicron is surging in the U.S. and elsewhere, and also, pretty clear that Omicron is evading vaccine for the most part, and vaccine efficacy is dropping a lot. So even Tony Fauci came out on the news, did news circuit a couple of days ago, basically saying everybody's going to get Omicron,
Mm.
regardless of whether you're vaccinated, which is that's a pretty big shift
Yeah.
in the narrative. You might not have even seen that, Autumn. This was just yesterday.
I didn't see that, but oh, that's
So,
good.
what that means is that we have to take steps to cultivate and support our immune system. And everything we've been talking about already on the show is directly related to that: supporting your gut health, eating a nutrient dense diet, addressing inflammation, etc. But there are other nutrients that are particularly important, and one is vitamin C.
Mm.
So talk a little bit about vitamin C, how to get it in the diet, and then supplementation, because a lot of times people will just get, ascorbic acid powder at Costco in the half gallon kind of size or whatever, and call it a day because it's super cheap. So, what are the best options for people who want to make sure that they're getting enough of this critical immune supporting nutrient?
Yes. And first I want to say, I mean, vitamin C is so, it fills so many gaps, right? It supports the immune system over 20 ways. Very important for brain health, just for youthful looking skin. I mean, on and on and on. It's just, and most people think they need, 90 or 75 milligrams, but I just want people to know that those studies that originally taught us that, or that we drew that information from, are very small, limited. They didn't have sick people. They didn't have people who smoked. They didn't have people who exercised a lot more often. And so a lot of times we can benefit from more vitamin C than we even think. And
Yeah.
I think diet's always the place to begin, like you said. And so things like green bell peppers and strawberries and kiwis, and a lot of people think orange juice, but it's not actually one of the richest sources. You can get it from your greens. And that's one of the reasons I say 5 servings of, I'd say 5 servings of vegetables and a fruit every day or two. And just making sure that you get them spaced throughout the day, because vitamin C doesn't last that long in your body. And
Yeah.
so you want to keep replenishing. It's like 4 to 6 hours. But if, like you said, if people want to supplement, I've done a deep dive on the research on vitamin C. There's a lot of benefits, and even ascorbic acid. Like most vitamin C comes from ascorbic acid, right? Which starts as, genetically modified corn. It's turned into corn syrup, then it's treated with acetone, then it's crystallized, and then it becomes
delicious.
this. I know, right? It's this multiple step process. And then you get this powder, and it's essentially the antioxidant outer shell of the vitamin C complex, right? So if that's all you can afford, I never want to make people scared of vitamin C, but a whole food form is better. In certain trials, it can reduce inflammation and oxidative stress in a way that ascorbic acid won't. You're not going to get the cofactors. You're not going to get tyrosinase, which supports your thyroid, and you're not going to get ascorbinogen or scorbinogen and rutin and all the J and P factors that are supporting your blood vessels. And so what I need people to know is food first, for sure. And then we also created a supplement that has 3 of the world's most potent natural sources of vitamin C. And you can supplement with that. It has 450 milligrams, which we chose because it's estimated that our paleo ancestors had about 400 milligrams of vitamin C a day, even though we're told that we only need about 90 milligrams. But
that's what you need to avoid scurvy. Like this is the difference between the recommended dietary allowance, which often is just the amount that you need to avoid acute disease, and what's actually optimal.
Right.
Even in normal times, not to mention during a global pandemic where we want our immune system to be functioning on all, firing on all cylinders.
Right. Exactly. And, vitamin C is going to support those white blood cells, and just, and it does compete. This is one thing that's kind of interesting. It competes sometimes with sugar for access to our cells. And so you don't want to eat it at a time when you're not also eating a bunch of carbohydrates and things like that. But yeah, I think stabilizing your blood sugar, adding some vitamin C from a whole food source, and avoiding ascorbic acid if you can is best case scenario.
Yeah. Great. Well, those are definitely 2 of my favorite Paleo Valley products. The beef sticks being the third. Those are in Utah here. I try to be outside almost all the time if I can be, and that takes different forms at different times of year. In the summer, it's mountain biking, hiking, backpacking, rafting, and just spending often a lot of time well away from civilization, doing air quotes here. And the beef sticks are amazing for that. Like, being on a backpacking trip or multi-day rafting trip or mountain biking trip or something like that, where I'm just taking what I can pack with me. And generally for anyone who backpacks, that you're trying to pack as little as possible, right? And so you're trying to take the things that are going to be the most nutrient dense by weight, and also and the most satisfying, because you're not, you might, cook, different people do it differently, right? I don't, stop. I'll have just generally like 1 cooked meal in the evening, and the rest of the time I'm eating like, pemmican that I've made, or beef sticks that I bring from Paleo Valley, because they're like super small, easy to pack. I love them, and they've got a ton of nutrient value. So they're really good for people who need that kind of additional nutrition throughout the day, and they're out and about a lot. I think it's an amazing product.
Well, thank you for saying that. And that's exactly why we created it, because I was always on the go, and protein snacks, you don't have to eat all the time throughout the day when you have really high quality protein, and they're fermented. So, they're more digestible, and they're like, not like jerky. They have like a little snap. And so I think the flavor is just different than a lot of other things on the market. So thanks.
Yeah. And let me just like say that, because some people are probably like, fermented meat? That doesn't sound very good. You would never know they were fermented. Like we're not talking about like fermented fish, which can be a pretty vivid experience. It's not something you can taste, other than like that, like you said, they have a kind of nice tangy, like snap kind of, it's way more interesting, I think, of a flavor than a lot of the jerky products on the market.
I think it's like those hickory smoked summer sausages. I was just going to say, That's kind of the flavor situation.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, smoking, it's a different way of thinking about it. And it's, of course, it's the way that our ancestors preserved meat as well, before they would go on trips and things like that. So, and the fermentation brings out additional nutrients. We know that from lots
Yeah.
and lots of research, and makes them more bioavailable and digestible. So that's a great thing about the beef sticks too, I think, is for some people, eating a lot of meat in that form can be hard to digest, but with the fermentation makes that a lot easier.
Yeah. Lots of
So
people say that.
yeah, where can people find out, try some beef sticks and organ delight and this other stuff we've been talking about? Because I think it's we get a lot of emails from people asking, what I recommend, and I don't often do these kinds of podcasts. I only do them when I think it's going to be of great value to people, and when I want to share the things that I'm excited about, and the products that I use on a daily basis. So yeah, I'm super happy to be able to tell people about this, because it's the next best thing to whole foods, and in many cases they are whole foods, like the
Yeah.
beef sticks.
Oh, well, thank you for that. That means a lot. And so we have 3 different things going right now. You can use the link that we'll provide at the podcast for sure. And then also at paleovalley.com, you can find all of our products. We have a lot of them. We also have a regenerative meat delivery service now called Wild Pastures, and it just connects American regenerative farmers. And then we deliver that meat to their doorstep. And then the third and most recent, really exciting enterprise is we started a burger restaurant, and it's
Oh
all
wow.
regeneratively raised burgers, and it has gluten-free buns. There's no refined sugar in the whole place. We cook our French fries in tallow. Produce is organic. I mean, it's pretty awesome, and it's here in Boulder right now, but eventually we hope to franchise, and that's called the Wild Pastures Burger Company. So any of those 3 places would be great, or you can just email me directly at autumn@paleovalley.com.
Great, Autumn. Thanks so much for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you, and
Yeah.
look forward to chatting again in the future.
Yes, hope to see you in Cabo. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. So thanks everyone for listening. Keep sending your questions to chriskresser.com/podcast question, and we'll see you next time. That's the end of this episode of Revolution Health Radio. If you appreciate the show and want to help me create a healthier and happier world, please head over to iTunes and leave us a review. They really do make a difference. If you'd like to ask a question for me to answer on a future episode, you can do that at chriskresser.com/podcast question. You can also leave a suggestion for someone you'd like me to interview there. If you're on social media, you can follow me at twitter.com/chriskresser or facebook.com/chriskresserlac. I post a lot of articles and research that I do throughout the week there that never makes it to the blog or podcast, so it's a great way to stay abreast of the latest developments. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you next time.